It was a chilly evening in a small town where everyone seemed to know each other. Streetlights flickered along the narrow roads, casting long shadows over the quiet sidewalks. Most people were already indoors, wrapped in warm blankets, sipping tea or sharing laughs with family. But in one corner of the town, near a row of closed shops, a young boy huddled against the cold. His clothes were thin and worn out, his shoes torn at the toes and his hair tangled and dusty. He shivered, trying to curl himself into a smaller shape, hoping to block the biting wind. He had nowhere to go, no one to turn to, and each day felt heavier than the last. The boy had been on the streets for as long as he could remember. His parents were gone, and distant relatives either could not or would not care for him. Life on the streets had taught him how to survive, but it had also taken away his sense of safety and belonging. He had learned to avoid trouble, to watch every movement around him, and to never trust easily. Yet, despite the harshness of his life, a small part of him still hoped that one day someone might notice him. Someone might care enough to reach out. That hope, fragile as it was, kept him moving from one empty alley to another, searching for a meal or a place to rest. At the same time, not far from where the boy sat, a man walked through the streets with a gentle but determined step. He was a pastor, known in the community for his unwavering commitment to helping those in need. His life was devoted to the church and to the people around him, especially the ones who had no one else to turn to. He had walked these streets countless times, delivering food, clothing, and sometimes just a kind word to people who felt invisible to the world. And on this particular evening, he carried a basket of warm food and blankets, thinking of the cold nights that many faced alone. As he rounded the corner, the pastor noticed a small figure huddled in the shadows. His heart stirred at the sight. He had seen many people in need, but something about this boy caught his attention in a way he could not ignore. The boy's eyes, though tired and wary, held a quiet intelligence and a glimmer of curiosity. The pastor slowed down, speaking softly so as not to startle him. "Hello there," he said gently. "Are you all right? It's cold out here." The boy flinched at first, unsure whether to trust the stranger. He had learned that kindness could sometimes hide danger. But something in the pastor's voice, steady and warm, made him pause. He looked up shivering and met the man's eyes. I'm okay," the boy mumbled, his voice barely audible over the wind. He tried to shrink further into his coat, hoping the man would just pass by. But the pastor didn't move. He knelt down to the boy's level, showing that he meant no harm. "You don't look okay," the pastor said softly. "You're cold and your clothes aren't enough for this weather. Can I help you?" The boy's guard remained up, but he noticed the kindness in the pastor's expression. No one had asked him that in a long time. He had been treated as a problem to ignore or a nuisance to avoid, not as a person who deserved help. Still, he hesitated. "Why would you care about me?" he asked cautiously, suspicion lacing his words. The pastor smiled gently. "Because every person matters," he replied. "And because I can. That's enough reason for me." He held out the basket he had been carrying. Inside were sandwiches, a thermos of warm soup, and a few blankets. The boy's stomach growled at the sight and his eyes widened, but he still did not move. The pastor waited patiently, saying nothing more, giving the boy space to make his choice. Eventually, hunger and the faintest spark of trust won over. The boy reached out, taking a sandwich with trembling hands. The warmth of the food was immediate, seeping through him and easing some of the fear that had built up over the years. They sat there quietly for a few moments. The pastor did not press him with questions, did not demand an explanation. He simply offered company and understanding, a rare thing for someone who had lived in the shadows of society for so long. The boy ate slowly, savoring each bite, and felt a strange sensation he hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. Someone had noticed him, someone had cared, not for what he could give or do, but simply for who he was. After finishing the meal, the pastor gently asked, "Do you have a place to stay tonight?" The boy shook his head, avoiding eye contact. "No, nowhere," he admitted. He had spent countless nights shivering under bridges, behind closed doors, or in abandoned buildings. Each night brought fear, hunger, and loneliness. The pastor nodded, understanding the weight of those words. "Would you like to come with me?" he asked. "I can give you a warm bed, some clean clothes, and a safe place to rest." The boy's mind raced. Trusting someone completely felt impossible, yet something in the pastor's presence reassured him. He wanted to say no, to protect himself from disappointment, but the warmth of the food and the sincerity in the man's eyes made the decision easier. "Okay," he said softly, almost in disbelief. The pastor smiled and extended his hand. The boy took it, feeling a small but significant sense of connection for the first time in years. The pastor led him through the quiet streets to the church, a modest building that glowed softly in the evening light. Inside, the warmth hit them immediately, chasing away the cold that clung to the boy's bones. The pastor handed him a blanket and some dry clothes, encouraging him to freshen up. The boy felt awkward and shy, but also safe, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a very long time. For the first time, he realized that kindness could exist without conditions, without hidden agendas, and without judgment. Over the next few hours, the pastor shared stories about the church, the people he helped, and the values he lived by: honesty, compassion, and the importance of helping others. He never forced the boy to speak, but he listened patiently whenever the boy wanted to share. Slowly, the boy began to open up about his life, the loss of his parents, the nights spent alone, and the constant fear of never finding a place where he belonged. The pastor listened carefully, never interrupting, never judging. Just listening. It was a simple act, but for the boy it felt revolutionary. He felt seen, heard, and understood in a way that he had never experienced before. That night, the boy slept in a proper bed for the first time in years. The blanket felt heavy in a comforting way. The room was quiet and warm, and for the first time he dreamed not of hunger or fear, but of possibility. The pastor checked in on him before leaving, smiling and telling him he was welcome any time. There was no pressure, no expectation, only genuine care, and as the boy drifted off to sleep, he realized that life could be different. Maybe, just maybe, there were people who would care, who would look after him, and who could help him find a place in the world. The next morning, the boy woke to the smell of breakfast and the soft light of the sun streaming through the window. The pastor was there, waiting with a warm meal and a gentle smile. He encouraged the boy to eat, to take his time, and to ask any questions he might have. They talked about the day ahead, about small tasks in the church, and about ways the boy could start learning skills that might help him survive on his own one day. It was not overwhelming or rushed. It was steady and kind, and it made the boy feel capable for the first time. Over the next few weeks, the boy became more comfortable with the pastor. He began helping with small chores in the church, learning simple skills, and interacting with other people in the community who were kind and welcoming. He discovered that people could be good without expecting something in return. He started to believe that life could hold more than hardship and loneliness, and although he still carried the scars of his past, he felt a flicker of hope that one day he could be more than just a boy surviving on the streets. The pastor never forced him to do anything, never scolded or judged him, only offered guidance and support. He taught the boy simple lessons about life: how to treat others with respect, how to be honest, and how small acts of kindness could change someone's day. Slowly, the boy began to feel that maybe, just maybe, he could have a future. The first step had been taken, not through grand gestures, but through warmth, patience, and the simple act of noticing someone who had been overlooked for so long. And so, the first chapter of their story ended not with a dramatic change, but with quiet trust, small steps toward healing, and the beginning of a bond that neither time nor distance would easily break. The boy had found someone who believed in him, and for the first time he started to believe in himself. After that first night, the boy began to settle into a small routine. The pastor had given him a clean set of clothes and a warm bed, but he knew that real change would not come overnight. He understood that the boy needed time to trust, time to heal, and space to find a sense of belonging. Each day the pastor greeted him with a smile and offered small lessons, gentle encouragement, and kind words. He never forced the boy to do anything, never scolded him for mistakes, and never made him feel like a burden. Slowly, the boy started to see the pastor as more than just someone giving him food or shelter. He began to see him as a guide, a mentor, and a friend. The boy's mornings started with simple chores around the church. He would sweep the floors, help prepare breakfast for the other people who came for meals, and tidy up the small rooms in the building. At first, he struggled with these tasks. Sweeping seemed endless. Washing dishes took longer than it should, and making the beds felt awkward. Yet the pastor never criticized him. Instead, he would quietly show him the right way, patiently guiding his hands or demonstrating the steps again and again. The boy began to understand that making mistakes was part of learning, and he slowly grew more confident in his abilities. In addition to chores, the pastor encouraged the boy to start learning basic skills that would help him later in life. He began with reading simple books and practicing writing short sentences. At first, the boy was hesitant. He had not gone to school regularly and felt embarrassed about how little he knew. But the pastor encouraged him gently, explaining that everyone starts somewhere and that it was never too late to learn. Day by day, the boy's reading improved. He could write his name clearly, read simple words, and even start forming sentences on his own. The pastor would celebrate these small victories with a warm smile, reinforcing the idea that progress, no matter how small, mattered. The boy also began attending community gatherings organized by the church. These gatherings were filled with laughter, music, and stories, and they gave him a chance to interact with other children and adults who treated him with respect. At first, he was shy, hiding in the corner and observing quietly. But as he saw the pastor speak kindly to everyone, and as he experienced people smiling at him and inviting him to join, he slowly started participating. He learned how to introduce himself, how to ask questions politely, and how to share a meal without fear. For the first time, he felt like he belonged somewhere. Of course, life was not without challenges. Sometimes the boy would recall the harsh nights on the streets, and the memories would bring tears to his eyes. Other times, he felt anger and frustration at the way life had treated him. There were moments when he wanted to give up, to run back to the streets where he had learned to survive because it felt familiar, even if it was cruel. But the pastor was always there. He would sit with the boy, listening without judgment, letting him speak his fears and frustrations. Sometimes they would sit in silence, and sometimes they would talk quietly about dreams, hopes, and the future. The boy began to understand that he could express his emotions without shame, that it was okay to feel pain and fear, and that someone could care about him despite all of that. The pastor also taught the boy about kindness and respect for others. He explained that life was full of struggles and that everyone, no matter how rich or poor, had challenges to face. He encouraged the boy to help others when he could, even in small ways, because kindness could make a real difference. At first, the boy found this confusing. How could he help anyone when he had so little himself? But the pastor showed him that even small acts like sharing food, holding the door open, or speaking a kind word could create a ripple of goodness in the world. Slowly, the boy started to practice these lessons, and each act made him feel stronger and more connected to the community. One day, the pastor brought him to a local park where other children were playing. The boy hesitated, feeling nervous among so many faces he did not know. But the pastor stayed with him, introducing him to the other kids and encouraging him to join in. At first, he played quietly, observing and learning the games, but soon he was running, laughing, and even making friends. He realized that he could be accepted for who he was, not just for what he had or where he came from. These moments of joy were new and sometimes overwhelming, but they reminded him that life could hold happiness, not just fear and hardship. Education became a bigger part of the boy's life. The pastor found a small community school where the boy could attend during the day. The boy was nervous at first. He had fallen behind compared to other children his age. But the teachers were kind and patient, and the pastor encouraged him constantly. He reminded him that learning was a journey, and that mistakes were part of growth. Slowly, the boy began to catch up. He learned basic math, reading, and writing, and even started showing curiosity about subjects he had never encountered before. The more he learned, the more he realized that his mind could open doors that the streets had kept closed. Knowledge became a source of power, a tool that could change his life forever. Despite progress, the boy still faced temptations and dangers. Friends from the streets would occasionally approach him, trying to lure him back into old habits or risky situations. They mocked him for going to school, for following the pastor, and for believing that life could be better. At first, the boy wavered. He missed the streets in some ways, the freedom, the familiarity, the survival instinct. But the pastor's guidance helped him make choices. The boy realized that choosing a better path was not easy, but it was worth it. He began to understand that his past did not define him, and that he could shape his own future. The bond between the boy and the pastor grew stronger with each passing day. The pastor became a steady presence in his life, someone he could rely on without fear of judgment or disappointment. They would spend evenings together, sometimes reading, sometimes talking, and sometimes just sitting quietly. The pastor shared stories of people who had overcome hardships, tales of hope and resilience, and lessons about the importance of faith and perseverance. The boy absorbed these lessons, slowly building a sense of self-worth that he had never felt before. He realized that someone had believed in him, had invested in him, and had never given up on him, even when he had no reason to hope. One particular evening, the boy asked the pastor a question that had been on his mind for a long time. "Why did you help me?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine curiosity and a hint of disbelief. The pastor looked at him kindly, and after a moment he replied, "Because everyone deserves a chance. Everyone deserves to feel loved and safe even when the world seems unfair. And because I saw something in you, a spark that told me you could be more than what you were surviving as." The boy did not fully understand all the words, but he felt the meaning. For the first time, he felt valued not for what he could give, but for who he was. Months turned into a year, and the boy transformed. He became more confident, more self-assured, and more hopeful. He still had moments of doubt and fear, but they became smaller, less powerful. He learned that he could ask for help without feeling weak, that he could share his dreams without embarrassment, and that he could be part of a community that cared for him. The pastor never rushed him, never pushed him too hard, and never expected perfection. He celebrated small victories and offered guidance through setbacks. In this patient, consistent care, the boy found the foundation he had been missing his entire life. As the boy grew stronger, he began to understand the importance of giving back. He helped younger children who were new to the church, showing them kindness and patience just as the pastor had shown him. He offered to help with chores, teach basic lessons, and even comfort those who were struggling. Through this, he realized that the lessons the pastor had taught him were not just about survival. They were about shaping a life of meaning, purpose, and compassion. And each act of kindness made him feel more complete, more confident, and more human. By the end of the second year, the boy had transformed from a scared, lonely child into a young adolescent with hope, purpose, and the beginnings of a sense of identity. He was no longer defined by the streets, by hunger, or by fear. He was defined by the choices he made, the lessons he learned, and the bond he had formed with someone who truly cared. The pastor had given him more than shelter or food. He had given him the tools to rebuild his life, to trust again, and to see the potential within himself. And so the boy's second chapter was one of growth, healing, and discovery. He learned that life could be better than survival, that people could be genuinely kind, and that hope could exist even after years of hardship. The pastor remained a constant, steady presence, guiding him with wisdom, patience, and unwavering love. And as the boy began to imagine his future, he felt something he had never felt before: possibility. Time moved on, and the boy, once scared and lonely, had grown into a young man. The years he spent under the pastor's care had shaped him in ways he did not yet fully understand. He had learned to trust, to work hard, and to believe in himself. The boy who once shivered on cold streets now walked with purpose, his posture straighter, his eyes brighter, and his mind full of possibilities. Yet, growing up came with new challenges, ones that were very different from the struggles of surviving on the streets. The young man had finished school, an accomplishment that once seemed impossible. The pastor had always reminded him that education was a doorway to freedom, a way to open up opportunities that life on the streets had denied him. He had studied diligently, often late into the night, guided by the pastor's encouragement. But now, as he stepped into the adult world, he realized that learning was only the first step. The real challenge was finding his place, making a living, and carving out a life that reflected the values he had been taught. Work became the next step. The young man found a job at a local store, starting with small responsibilities. He stocked shelves, cleaned the floors, and assisted customers. At first, the tasks seemed ordinary, even dull, but he approached them with the same care and diligence that the pastor had taught him. He arrived on time, completed his work efficiently, and treated everyone with respect. Slowly, his efforts were noticed by the manager, and opportunities for more responsibility began to appear. Though the salary was modest, the young man felt proud of his work. For the first time, he was earning money on his own, and with that money came a sense of independence and self-reliance that he had never known. Even as he worked hard, life continued to test him. There were days when customers were rude, when the work felt overwhelming, or when unexpected problems arose. There were times when bills piled up, when rent was difficult to pay, and when the fear of failing crept into his mind. On those days, he would remember the pastor's lessons: perseverance, patience, and integrity. He reminded himself that setbacks were temporary, that challenges were part of life, and that giving up would never bring the satisfaction of achievement. He learned to take things one step at a time, solving problems as they came and refusing to let fear control him. During this time, the young man also began to build relationships outside of work. He met other people in the community, slowly forming friendships based on shared experiences and mutual respect. He learned to listen, to support others, and to share in both joys and struggles. The lessons the pastor had taught him about kindness and empathy guided these interactions. He found that helping others, even in small ways, brought him joy and a sense of purpose that work alone could not provide. He would volunteer occasionally at the church, assisting with community programs, helping younger children with reading, or distributing meals to those in need. Each act, though small, reminded him of where he had come from and the path that had brought him to this point. Yet despite his growth and successes, memories of the streets lingered. He would sometimes wake at night, haunted by the cold, the hunger, and the loneliness he had endured. Occasionally, he would see people who reminded him of himself, other boys and girls living on the streets, and a wave of helplessness would wash over him. He remembered the despair he had felt, the fear that no one would ever care, and the weight of being alone in the world. It was during these moments that he felt the deepest gratitude for the pastor, whose guidance and care had given him a second chance at life. The young man also faced moments of temptation. Old acquaintances from the streets would appear, tempting him with shortcuts, quick money, and risky schemes. They would tease him for following the rules, for working honestly, and for dreaming of a better life. At first he struggled, sometimes doubting whether he could resist the allure of an easier path. But then he would recall the pastor's words: "Integrity and hard work are the foundation of lasting success, while shortcuts often lead to failure and regret." These reminders strengthened him, and he began to see that the choices he made now would shape the man he would become. Romance entered his life in small, gentle ways. He met someone who appreciated his kindness, patience, and determination. The relationship was not without its challenges, but it was built on respect, trust, and shared values. The young man realized that the lessons learned from the pastor extended beyond work and survival. They applied to love, friendship, and every human connection. He began to understand that nurturing relationships required patience, understanding, and compassion, just as the pastor had taught him. Through all these experiences, the young man never lost sight of the pastor. The man who had once given him food, shelter, and guidance remained a constant presence in his life, a source of wisdom and reassurance. He would visit the pastor regularly, sharing stories of his work, his successes, and his struggles. Each visit strengthened their bond, reminding the young man of the value of mentorship and the power of unconditional support. The pastor would smile at his progress, proud but humble, always redirecting credit to the young man's own effort and resilience. The young man's understanding of life deepened as he faced new responsibilities. He began saving money, thinking about the future, and planning ways to improve his situation. He learned the importance of budgeting, setting goals, and making thoughtful decisions. The pastor helped him think through choices, offering advice without imposing it. The young man started to dream of a life where he could not only survive but thrive, where he could help others just as he had been helped. He realized that the generosity and kindness he had received were gifts meant to be shared. As the years passed, the young man began to see the fruits of his hard work. He received promotions at work, gained recognition in his community, and developed a reputation for honesty and dedication. People respected him not for wealth or status, but for character and reliability. He understood that success was not only about money or position, but about the way one treated others and the choices one made each day. He had learned that the values instilled in him by the pastor, compassion, patience, integrity, and perseverance, were more important than any paycheck or title. Despite his growing independence, he remained humble and connected to the community. He never forgot the struggles of his past, and he remained committed to helping those who were still in need. He volunteered at the church regularly, mentoring younger children, assisting with outreach programs, and distributing meals to the homeless. He saw in them a reflection of himself, and he wanted to offer the same guidance and support that had transformed his life. Each act of kindness was a reminder that life's purpose was not only to succeed, but to lift others along the way. Through these years, the young man learned patience and resilience. He discovered that life could be unpredictable, filled with challenges that tested his strength and character. He experienced disappointments, moments when plans fell through, and times when progress seemed slow. But he had learned from the pastor that setbacks were part of the journey. They were not signs of failure, but opportunities to grow, to adapt, and to strengthen one's resolve. This mindset allowed him to navigate life's uncertainties with confidence and determination. One of the most important lessons he carried was the understanding of gratitude. He knew that his life had been transformed by the compassion of one person, the pastor, who had seen potential where others had seen only a homeless boy. He learned to value every act of kindness, every opportunity, and every moment of support. Gratitude became a guiding principle in his life, influencing the way he treated others and the way he approached challenges. He realized that by appreciating the help he had received, he could honor it through his actions and decisions. As the young man approached adulthood fully, he began to think more seriously about the future. He dreamed of building a life that was meaningful, not just comfortable. He wanted to ensure that his success could be shared, that the blessings he had received could be extended to others. The pastor encouraged these thoughts, helping him plan realistically and thoughtfully. They discussed goals, aspirations, and the steps needed to achieve them. The young man felt a sense of purpose he had never known, a drive not fueled by desperation but by hope and vision. Throughout all these experiences, the bond between the young man and the pastor remained strong. The pastor had not only provided shelter and guidance, but had become a symbol of what life could offer when kindness and care were extended without conditions. The young man often reflected on the early days, the cold nights on the streets, the fear and loneliness that had once consumed him. He realized that without the pastor, he might have remained lost, wandering through life with no direction or hope. Now he had a foundation, a moral compass, and the confidence to face the world. The young man also began to understand the power of mentorship. He saw how one person's support could change the course of a life, and he wanted to be that person for others. He started mentoring children in the community, teaching them skills, offering guidance, and showing patience. He shared his own story not to boast but to inspire, to give them hope that change was possible. Through this, he understood that the kindness he had received was not a gift to hoard but a gift to share. Each life he touched became a testament to the pastor's belief in him, a living example of how compassion could ripple through generations. By the end of these formative years, the young man had transformed completely. He was no longer the frightened, homeless boy who had once huddled in the cold. He was confident, capable, and compassionate, ready to face the challenges of adulthood with resilience and wisdom. He had learned that life was not only about surviving, but about giving, learning, and growing. And while the world could be harsh, he had also learned that kindness, guidance, and support could light the darkest paths. Years had passed since the young man had first found shelter and guidance under the pastor's care. Life had taken him on a journey full of challenges, hard work, and small victories. He had grown into a strong, confident adult, capable of facing the world and making decisions on his own. Yet through all the successes and struggles, one thought had never left him. The pastor who had once given him food, clothing, guidance, and hope had changed his life forever. The memory of that warmth, patience, and unconditional care stayed with him every day. He realized that his achievements, no matter how big, were rooted in the kindness of one man who had believed in him when no one else would. It was this thought that inspired the young man to return. He had been thinking about it for months, planning quietly and carefully. He wanted to show gratitude not just in words but through action. He wanted the pastor to know that his investment in a homeless boy had not been wasted, that the lessons, love, and guidance he had received had grown into something meaningful and lasting. He imagined how proud the pastor might feel, how deeply moved he would be to see the boy he had cared for now, standing strong and accomplished. The day of the visit arrived, and the young man felt a mixture of excitement, nervousness, and anticipation. He walked through the familiar streets of the town, each corner bringing back memories of his childhood, the cold alleys, the closed shops where he had sought shelter, and the quiet nights filled with fear and uncertainty. Now the streets looked different to him. They seemed smaller, less intimidating, and filled with promise rather than dread. He had changed, and he hoped the pastor would see that transformation. As he approached the church, he noticed the familiar glow of the building, the warmth spilling out into the street even in the late afternoon. The pastor, older now, was tending to a small garden in front of the church as he often did, his hands steady and gentle. The young man paused for a moment, taking in the sight. The pastor looked up, squinting in the sunlight, and their eyes met. For a moment both were silent, each absorbing the significance of the reunion. The pastor's face broke into a wide, welcoming smile. "Is that really you?" he asked, his voice filled with surprise and joy. The young man nodded, a smile forming across his own face. "Yes, it's me," he replied. I wanted to come back and see you." The pastor stood, walking over to him slowly, and they embraced, a long, meaningful hug that spoke of years of separation, gratitude, and unspoken emotions. After the initial greeting, they sat down together in the church courtyard, surrounded by the familiar sights of the place that had once been a sanctuary for the boy. The young man began to speak, recounting the years that had passed, sharing his journey and describing the successes and challenges he had faced. He spoke of the jobs he had taken, the skills he had learned, and the life he had built. He spoke honestly about the hardships, the moments of doubt, and the times when he had almost given up. Through it all, he emphasized one thing repeatedly. The pastor's guidance had been the foundation upon which everything else had been built. The pastor listened quietly, nodding and smiling, his eyes reflecting pride and humility. He asked questions, not out of doubt but out of genuine interest, wanting to understand the young man's experiences and growth. "I am so proud of you," the pastor said softly. "You have worked hard, made the right choices, and grown into a remarkable person. I always knew you had it in you." The young man shook his head, a little embarrassed by the praise. "I couldn't have done it without you," he said. "You gave me a chance when no one else did. You showed me what kindness and patience could do. You taught me how to believe in myself." As they spoke, the young man shared something he had carried in his heart for years. He had saved money, not just for his own security, but to invest in the church and community that had given him so much. He wanted to help other children and teenagers who were struggling, who felt lost and alone as he had once felt. The pastor listened, his eyes glistening with emotion. He realized that the boy he had helped so many years ago had grown into a man who understood the value of giving back, who wanted to extend the same kindness he had once received to others. The young man then revealed a plan he had been working on quietly. He wanted to start a small foundation in the community, dedicated to helping homeless children find shelter, education, and guidance. He had been studying how to organize resources, raise funds, and work with volunteers. He wanted the foundation to provide not only food and clothing, but also mentorship, emotional support, and life skills. Everything he had received from the pastor. The pastor listened intently, nodding with encouragement and pride. "This is exactly what the world needs," he said. "You are taking the lessons you've learned and turning them into action. You are paying forward the gift you were given." The conversation continued long into the evening. They talked about the community, the children still in need, and ways to make a lasting impact. The young man described the challenges he anticipated and the strategies he had in mind to overcome them. The pastor offered advice, drawing on years of experience but never imposing his own views. It was a partnership now, a collaboration born from years of trust, respect, and shared purpose. The young man realized that the pastor was still teaching him, still guiding him, but now in a different way, through collaboration rather than instruction. The pastor also shared stories from the years since the boy had left, telling him about other children and adults who had faced challenges, but had found their own paths with help and guidance. He spoke of the power of community, the ripple effect of kindness, and the way one small act of love could change countless lives. The young man listened, inspired by the idea that his own efforts could create similar ripples in the lives of others. He understood that the foundation he wanted to build was not just about immediate help, but about creating opportunities for lasting change, teaching children and teens to believe in themselves, just as he had been taught. At one point, the pastor paused and looked at the young man with a gentle smile. "Do you know what makes me happiest?" he asked. The young man shook his head. "It's seeing you standing here ready to help others, carrying forward what you were given. That is the true reward." Everything else, success, money, recognition, is secondary. The real joy comes from seeing the next generation rise, inspired by those who care. The young man felt a warmth in his chest, a deep sense of fulfillment and purpose. He realized that his journey had come full circle, from a frightened boy on the streets to a young man ready to change the world, all because someone had once believed in him. The young man stayed at the church for a few days, helping with ongoing projects and meeting members of the community. He saw firsthand the impact of the pastor's work, the way small acts of kindness had touched countless lives. He began planning how his foundation could complement and expand upon this work, creating programs that would address education, nutrition, and emotional support. Every conversation, every observation, reinforced his determination to make a difference, to honor the gift he had received years ago. During these days, the young man also reflected on his personal growth. He thought about the fears he had once carried, the loneliness that had seemed endless, and the hopelessness that had weighed on his heart. He recognized how far he had come, and how much of that progress was rooted in the pastor's guidance. Gratitude filled him, not just for the material help, but for the lessons, the patience, and the unconditional care. He understood that these were gifts that could never be repaid with money alone, but could be honored through action, service, and continued kindness. Before leaving the church, the young man presented a gift to the pastor, not something expensive, but meaningful. It was a collection of letters, stories, and plans, detailing how he intended to use his life and resources to help others, inspired by the pastor's example. The pastor accepted the gift with tears in his eyes, deeply moved. "You have made me prouder than you can imagine," he said softly. "The boy I once helped is now a man ready to help the world. That is the greatest reward I could ever hope for." The young man hugged the pastor again before departing, promising to return soon and keep him informed of the foundation's progress. He left with a heart full of gratitude, determination, and a renewed sense of purpose. The reunion had not only strengthened his resolve, but had also reminded him that the lessons he had learned, patience, kindness, integrity, and perseverance, were not just for personal growth, but for the growth of others as well. As he walked away from the church, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. He had faced cold streets, hunger, fear, and uncertainty. He had experienced setbacks, doubts, and moments of despair. Yet through it all he had been given a chance, nurtured with care and guided with wisdom. Now he carried that gift forward, ready to make a difference, to honor the person who had once believed in him, and to create a legacy of kindness and hope for the next generation. This reunion, this return was more than a simple visit. It was a turning point. It was the moment when gratitude transformed into action, when the past became a foundation for the future. The young man realized that the bond he shared with the pastor was not just about mentorship, but about shared purpose, shared vision, and the power of one person to change a life, and through that life, countless others. After the reunion with the pastor, the young man returned to his life with renewed energy and a clear sense of purpose. He knew that words of gratitude were not enough. He needed to take action to honor the man who had changed his life. From that moment, every decision he made, every project he undertook, was guided by a single goal: to give back to the community and help those who, like him, had once been lost and alone. He began to plan carefully, mapping out how his resources, time, and skills could make the greatest impact. The first step was to establish a small foundation. The young man wanted it to focus on helping homeless children, giving them shelter, education, and guidance, the same things that had helped him transform his life. He reached out to local businesses, community leaders, and volunteers, sharing his vision and inviting them to join the effort. At first, some were skeptical, asking whether such a small organization could make a real difference. But the young man's determination, honesty, and passion were impossible to ignore. People began to believe in him, just as he had once believed in the pastor's guidance. The foundation started modestly. The young man rented a small building near the heart of the town. It had a few rooms, a kitchen, and a space for learning. He organized the rooms to feel welcoming, with bright walls, clean furniture, and a warm, inviting atmosphere. He wanted the children who came through the doors to feel safe and valued, not like they were being treated as a problem or burden. He remembered how he had felt as a child, cold, hungry, and invisible, and he made sure the environment was the opposite of that: warm, encouraging, and full of hope. Soon, the first children arrived. Some were shy, suspicious, and wary, much like the young man had been when he first met the pastor. They didn't trust easily, and some even tried to run away when things felt too unfamiliar. But the young man was patient. He didn't force them to talk, didn't scold them for acting out, and never made them feel pressured. He simply offered food, clean clothes, and a safe place to stay. Slowly, the children began to trust him. They started to join in activities, learn new skills, and feel the warmth of a community that cared. Education became a central focus of the foundation. The young man arranged for tutors to help the children with reading, writing, and basic math. He created programs that taught life skills: how to cook simple meals, take care of oneself, and interact respectfully with others. He emphasized the same lessons he had learned from the pastor: kindness, patience, perseverance, and integrity. Every day he reminded the children that they had value, that they could change their lives, and that they were capable of achieving more than they could imagine. The young man also implemented mentorship programs. Volunteers from the community came to spend time with the children, teaching them skills, offering guidance, and simply being present. Each mentor brought a unique perspective, a different set of skills, and a personal story of growth. The young man watched closely, making sure each child received the attention they needed. He understood that mentorship was not just about giving instructions. It was about building trust, offering support, and helping someone believe in themselves. The foundation faced challenges, as any new organization would. Funds were sometimes limited, volunteers were not always consistent, and emergencies arose unexpectedly. But the young man drew on the lessons of his past. He remembered the pastor's patience, his unwavering faith in others, and his calm approach to obstacles. He worked tirelessly, solving problems as they appeared, motivating his team and reminding everyone that the work they were doing was meaningful. The children themselves often inspired him. Their resilience, courage, and small successes reminded him of his own journey and reinforced the importance of continuing the mission. One day, the pastor came to visit the foundation. He walked through the rooms, observing the children laughing, learning, and helping one another. He watched as the young man guided them, showing kindness, patience, and wisdom. The pastor felt a deep sense of pride, not just for the young man's accomplishments, but for the way he was carrying forward the spirit of care and mentorship. He realized that the boy he had once helped had grown into a man who understood the true meaning of giving back. The young man approached the pastor, smiling warmly. "I wanted you to see this," he said. "This is what your kindness inspired. These children are the reason I do this every day. I want them to have the same chance I had." The pastor nodded, his eyes misting with tears. "You have done more than I could have hoped," he replied. "You have taken the lessons you learned and multiplied them. You have turned gratitude into action, and that is the greatest gift anyone can give." The foundation continued to grow. Word spread through the town about the safe haven for children, and more families and volunteers became involved. The young man organized workshops, community events, and skill-building activities, ensuring that each child had access to opportunities they might never have had otherwise. The focus was not only on survival but on empowerment, helping the children understand that their lives could be different, that their past did not define them, and that they could achieve great things with guidance and effort. Through it all, the young man never forgot his own journey. He would often think back to the nights spent on the streets, the fear of hunger, and the despair of being alone. These memories fueled his determination. He knew what it meant to be overlooked and ignored, and he wanted to ensure that no child in the community would feel that same hopelessness. He understood that love, patience, and guidance could transform a life, and he worked every day to provide exactly that. The children flourished under his care. Some who had once been shy and withdrawn began to speak confidently, form friendships, and participate in group activities. Others discovered hidden talents, whether in drawing, writing, or sports, and the young man made sure they had opportunities to explore and grow. Every small success became a victory, not just for the children, but for the young man as well. Each smile, each accomplishment, and each step forward reminded him why he had returned to repay the pastor's kindness and why the foundation mattered so much. The young man also learned important lessons himself during this time. He realized that giving back was not always easy. There were moments of exhaustion, frustration, and doubt. Some children resisted help. Some plans fell through, and sometimes resources were limited. But he never wavered. He drew strength from his own past, from the patience and guidance of the pastor, and from the knowledge that his work had meaning beyond measure. He discovered that true fulfillment came not from wealth or recognition, but from seeing others grow, thrive, and succeed because of his efforts. As months turned into years, the foundation became a vital part of the community. Children who had once felt lost now had safe spaces to learn, grow, and dream. Families felt supported. Volunteers felt valued. And the young man had created something far larger than he had ever imagined. Yet, despite all the success, he remained humble. He never forgot the person who had given him his first chance, the pastor who had seen potential when no one else did. He understood that every achievement, every positive impact, and every success story of the foundation traced back to that one act of kindness years ago. One afternoon, the young man and the pastor sat together in the foundation's courtyard, watching the children play. The pastor leaned back in his chair, a contented smile on his face. "You have done something incredible," he said quietly. "You have taken what you were given and turned it into a light for so many others. That is the true meaning of gratitude." The young man nodded, feeling a deep sense of peace. "I could never have done it without you," he said. "You taught me how to care, how to be patient, and how to believe in myself. Every day I try to give the same gift to these children." The pastor placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "And you have succeeded. You have become more than I could have imagined. The boy I helped is now a man who changes lives. That is the greatest reward I could ever hope for." The young man smiled, realizing that the journey that had begun with a simple act of kindness had come full circle. From a frightened boy on the streets to a man creating hope for countless others, he had honored the pastor's care in the most meaningful way possible. Through the foundation, the young man continued to touch lives. Children who had been forgotten by society found guidance, support, and love. They learned to read, write, and dream. They discovered talents and skills they never knew they had. Most importantly, they learned that someone believed in them just as someone had once believed in him. And through this, the young man felt a sense of fulfillment deeper than any wealth or recognition could provide. The story of the young man and the pastor became a quiet legend in the town, not through headlines or fame, but through the lives they had touched. People spoke of the boy who had once been homeless and the man who had believed in him, and how that belief had grown into something extraordinary. The foundation continued to thrive, a living testament to the power of kindness, mentorship, and the ripple effect of a single act of compassion. As the sun set on another day, the young man looked around at the children laughing, learning, and playing. He felt the same warmth he had felt all those years ago when the pastor first helped him. He understood now that life's greatest gift was not what you received, but what you gave. And he knew, deep in his heart, that the boy who had once been alone and lost had not only found his own path, but was now lighting the way for others.